teacher friends, even lovers and haters of poetry. I got a little bit of gamification and edutainment for you today. We are going to play a game of smartass focusing on 3 poems that I've selected. And basically why I do this is I find that it helps students with their multiple choice test taking skills when I first gamify or sprinkle in a little bit of test taking and gamification. So throughout the video, I'll go over the game, the setup, the guidelines, and we'll take a look at one poem in particular just so you get a sense of how to play this and manipulate things with your students in your classroom. Before I dive in, please subscribe and spread the word far and wide that this is my new YouTube channel, Kristian Kuhn, the Bob Ross of composition. We're growing exponentially and it tickles me. All right, so philosophically, this is what I believe. I think skillin' and drillin' is an act of futility. And here's what I mean by that. I often see teachers in the Facebook groups saying, I need more multiple choice tests. How can I get my hands on more multiple choice tests? The College Board only releases a set number of them. And I'm like, skip that, because I think what we ultimately need to do in order to get students to significantly augment their multiple choice test taking scores is to teach them how to question a text, how to ascertain meaning. So one of my staple texts is read like a professor. And the strategies that are purported in that book I use to cloak my questions for my gamified edutainment activities. So what you'll see here is that my kind of verbiage for my questions get to the heart of read like a professor-esque questions. So in terms of the gameplay, we literally just follow the original rules of smartass. I spread out the smartass board game and all the pieces in my classroom, and I project it with an Elmo projector onto the overhead. So as I said, I got 3 poems that I made for this particular edition of Smartass, and I wanted to go with contemporary poetry just because my students aren't really that well versed in the old school stuff yet. So I find if I go contemporary and then move backwards, they all stay on the bus a little better. So the poem that I'm going to focus on to illustrate how to play smartass is a poem from Poetry 180, Billy Collins' old project, and it's called Sentimental Moment or Why Did the Baguette Cross the Road by Robert Hershon. So what I'll do is I'll read the poem and then show you the types of questions I'm asking or posing to my students. So here is the poem. It's very short. Don't fill up on bread, I say absent-mindedly. The servings here are huge. My son, whose hair may be receding a bit, says, did you really just say that to me? What he doesn't know is that when we're walking together, when we get to the curb, I sometimes start to reach for his hand. So what I have my students do is this when we do poetry in class. I'll read it aloud the first time. They read it the second time, and I tell them to go lit terms, devices, techniques, hunting. Just see how the author creates meaning and what the authorial intent is. And then I read it a third time. So let's talk about the types of questions that I'm going to pose. In the game, there are where am I questions, what am I questions, who am I, and then the hard ass questions, right? So let me show you my where am questions based on this poem. So the first one says, a policing grammarian would reprimand Hershon for not properly concluding his sentences with a period. Where are the periods? And why is this syntactically significant? So one of the things we talked about the other day when I ran this in class is that Hershon's love for his child will forever remain young. He'll always be his little boy. And the lack of periods show that continuance, right? That behavioral pattern that will persist. Even when the boy's like 90 years old, the father will still see him as a little boy. So the lack of periods show that continuation because a period, demarks, a stoppage, a cessation, and it never stops, right? That love, that loving a boy, loving a child, even when they're grown, persist in their adulthood. Question 2, let's see this. Yet again, a policing grammarian would note that the parenthetical statement in the third stanza is missing a comma after curb. Where is the comma? And how does this absent comma create meaning in the work as a whole? So the where am I questions really get to the syntactical heart of the matter in this poem. The absence, the devoid of punctuation is something that I would want my students to notice, to observe, right? And that's the kind of stuff that we do with Read Like a Professor. So let's get to the next set of questions, which are the what am I's. And the first one says, the title is bridged by the word or. What part of speech is this, right? So I get into the parts of speech for poetry analysis. I think it's really important that kids know the parts of speech, at least the basic ones. How does this part of speech create meaning in the work as a whole? So a lot of my questions get to construction of meaning and authorial intent, which is essential when performing literary analysis. The second what am I question says, I spy with my little eye 2 question marks signifying that a question has been posed. What do we call these question marks? So rhetorical questions. In terms of constructing meaning, why does Hershon take this approach? So more syntax questions. So I chose this poem as kind of an elementary lesson on syntax. We did a lot of voice lessons with Nancy Dean to prepare kids for these types of questions. Now let's segue to the who am I questions. Describe who the father is. How does Hershon characterize him? Use the text to support your answer. So a lot of my questions require students to get their nose into the text and use textual support and textual analysis in their answer. The second who am I question says, describe the son. How does Hershon characterize him? Use the text to support your answer. Basic characterization questions, right? If they're going to write an essay about this, they do have to do a tad bit of characterization, even though it's a simple pursuit. And then the hard-ass questions. Analyze and interpret the title of the poem. Use the text to help support your position. That title is huge. They got to unpack that. Next one. As we know, tone is not monolithic. What are some fantastic words to describe the tone of the poem? And that pretty much gives us a total read of the poem. And what we do as we gamify it is students will just take turns answering the questions. I split them up into teams, just like the original directions of Smartass. And I have speaking quotas. So once a student has spoken twice, they can't speak again until everyone in the group has spoken once. I neglected to mention that earlier. So in terms of the other poems that I have here, there's a fantastic one by Martina Espada entitled Jorge the Church Janitor Finally Quits. That's kind of chock full of terms, devices, and techniques. And then an old staple in my classroom, Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. So if you want the questions that are posed for those 2 remaining poems, I did the same thing. Where am I? What am I? Who am I? And hard ass for the Jorge the Church Janitor Finally Quits and Still I Rise. In the description of this video, you can download those questions. In fact, you can download this PowerPoint if you want. So that's it from me. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. Also note that I'm a lead teacher for the National Writing Project. Throughout the calendar year, we have several PDs. Most are free, some are for a nominal fee. On my webpage, www.teachinghowtowrite.com, you can kind of stay abreast of my comings and goings. So I've been presenting quite a bit in recent years with NCTE, and we'll be doing so again. And it looks like we might be presenting at the AP conference too this summer. So hopefully, so I'm staying busy. And students that are watching this, note that I own my own tutoring company called Write at Ivy Write. I'm an expert on college personal statements and the supplements. So I used to work at Brown in admissions and know full well how to cobble those together. And I've worked with hundreds of kids over the years with that. And then if you need an extra boost with AP Lit or AP Lang, been teaching both courses for over 2 decades, and I can help with that as well. So that's it from here. Be well, happy gamifying, happy edutainment, and I'll see you the next time.